Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Are we good, Val?
We're good. Yeah,
Okay.
we're just waiting now. I could.
Hello, this is ASL interpreter Amy. I have something on my screen saying I'm in a practice session to start the webinar.
Yeah,
When I clicked on that, it said to open up to let people in, and I'm not touching it.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna that was what I was gonna ask next. Risha,
Okay.
do you want me to start the webinar or do you want to wait until 6?
I wanna, what happens when we start the webinar?
They'll just
what's
see
up?
the screen.
That's what happens when we start the webinar?
Well, they'll see us and the presentation. I'm just saying if you, because there's probably people already waiting to join. So if we start it, we could have this first slide up for people to just look at until 6 o'clock when we start. But, or we can wait until 6, whichever you're comfortable with.
I'm fine with that. Do we have absolutely everybody? Do we have everybody from the council here?
Not yet. We don't have
Not
everyone
yet.
from the council
Okay.
yet. Yeah, Mark.
Could I just remind everybody who's going to be speaking today to slow down, use simple language, and minimize the use of acronyms. And I just remembered, Val, that Han told me she would be here at about 6:15 because she's not on until later.
Here.
Oh, there you go.
Oh,
Hi,
she's
Han.
here. Okay, great. Han, how are you?
Husband was able to get home a little earlier today.
Okay, great.
Great. And
Okay.
then Martha asked if all the interpreters, just make sure that you keep an eye on the chat, just in case there are any messages that come through there for you.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
And for council members, I see Caroline, hello, nice to see you. Marcos, I see you. Let's see.
Hi Val, I'm on. Could you co-host me, please? Thank you.
Yes. Hi, Wayne. Thank you.
Hi.
This is ASL interpreter Paula. Is it possible to get the live transcript at the bottom of the toolbar?
Yeah, so I had an issue with that earlier because I couldn't. Oh, there it is. Now it's available. I couldn't find it earlier, but
Yeah, it comes and goes. I've never figured out why.
okay.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me to check that again.
So Val, we can start right at 6 if you don't mind, and then
Yeah.
I'll just do the piece of where we're going to hold for another 2 minutes. You know, I'll just do that portion about selecting the buttons for the channel. And we'll hold for 2 minutes. But let's start at 6, just so that.
Okay.
Oops. Could you ask me?
Do we know how many people have signed on right now?
None, I don't think until I started.
Oh, okay. I also want to remind the council members who's here to please just use the chat only for purposes of meeting logistics because of open meeting law requirements. Anything substantive, you know, should be spoken. Why don't we start, Val? Are we on?
Mhm.
Hello, you've entered the Zoom room for the Environmental Justice Council meeting. Please hold for a moment until more attendees have arrived and we're ready to begin the meeting. All attendees must select a language channel, even if viewing the presentation in English. The buttons for selecting a channel or American Sign Language are at the bottom of your screen. Closed captioning has been enabled for this presentation. If you would like a translated version of the presentation slides, please go to the Environmental Justice Council website at the link in the chat. You will find a translated set of presentation slides there. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth meeting of the Environmental Justice Council, whose members are appointed by the Governor's Office to advise the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, also called by the acronym EEA, about ways to promote and achieve environmental justice principles across the Commonwealth. I'm Rishi Reddy, the chairperson of the council and the Director of Environmental Justice at EEA. In addition to myself, we have Deputy EJ Director for Internal Agency Coordination, Valerie Cardoso, who is monitoring the question and answer function, also called the Q&A function. And we also have Carlene Lemoyne, our Deputy Director of Environmental Justice for External Stakeholder Coordination. You will also see on the screen the interpreters in 6 spoken languages and American Sign Language. Welcome to also members of the public and state staff who are observing today to comment and ask questions on the deliberation of the council. Next slide, please, Val. As usual, this is a complicated meeting to convene. We are running 7 simultaneous channels in a Zoom webinar format. We'll take a few minutes now to review the logistics, agenda, and take roll call. This meeting is being recorded and will later be available for viewing through a link that will be posted on the Environmental Justice Council website. That website address appears in the chat. I remind the council members to please only use the chat function for meeting logistics and no other communication about substance. That's in accordance with the open meeting law. Next slide, please, Val. This presentation is available with interpreters in Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Haitian Creole, Vietnamese, and Cape Verdean Creole and American Sign Language. Please speak slowly. Otherwise, the interpreters will not be able to keep up with you. All participants, again, must select a language channel at the bottom of your screen, even if viewing the presentation in English. Otherwise, English language viewers will not be able to hear interpreters when they address the council in English. And a last reminder that translated versions of the presentation slides are available at the link at the EJ Council website. Next slide, please, Val. I ask all members of the public to save any oral comments to the council and questions after the formal presentations. You can also submit questions in the Q&A box, which may be addressed after the formal presentations. If you have a question regarding the clarification of meeting logistics as we go along, please type it into the Q&A box where it can be answered immediately by Deputy Director Cardoso. Next slide, please, Val. I'm going to ask all members of the council to please put your name in the chat for the record. Here's the agenda for today. Does anybody on the council have any additional issues that fit within these topic areas that they would like to highlight at this time? No? All right, thank you. So let's move on. I just want to, let's do a quick roll call because I think we are so close to quorum that we might not be there. So let me just do a quick roll call here for Kalila Barnett. I see that you're here.
Yes.
Madeline Cook. Not yet. Melissa Harding Ferretti. Cheryl Hawley, I see you're here. Caroline Hahn.
Yes, hello.
Namrata Kapoor. And Lydia Lowe, I see you're here, Lydia.
Here.
Thank you. And Marcos Luna, I see you're here.
Here.
Peter Mathi.
Here.
Patricia Spence. No, and Ari Zorn. One,
I am
two.
here.
Thank you, Ari. Well, for the record, we've reached quorum, so let's proceed. So next slide. Oh, no, keep it on here, Val. We're talking now about the draft minutes for the September 27th meeting, which were emailed to the council members beforehand, so you'd have a chance to review. I'd like some feedback on that. Does anyone have any amendments that they'd like to make to these minutes? No? If not, then I'd like to open the floor for a motion to adopt the minutes as is. Do I have a motion, please?
This is Caroline Hahn, so moved.
Thank you, Caroline. And do I have a second, please?
This is Peter Monte, I second.
Okay, thank you. So I'm sorry, we'll have to run through the roll call again because under the open meeting law, all votes need to be taken by roll call so that they're heard into the record. So let me go down the list again. I apologize. Kalila?
Yes.
Do you vote? Thank you.
Yes, I approve.
Okay, thank you. And if Madeline is here, I don't know if she is. No. Melissa, if she's here. Cheryl?
I approve.
Thank you, Cheryl. Caroline, yes, you started.
Yes.
Namrata? Lydia?
Yes.
Marcos?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Patricia? And Ari?
Yes.
Thank you. So I think we're good with that. Let's accept these minutes as final minutes from the September 27th meeting. Next slide, please, Val. We have announcements. I have a couple of announcements that are pertinent to the EJ program at EEA. The first, which is a big one for us, is that the EJ strategy is expected to come out in mid-November. So please look for that. We will have a meeting for the EJ Council that will speak a little bit about the strategy when it's released. We will have an approximately 2-month-long waiting period. Stay tuned for that. There will be more substantial information, including links to the document in 10 languages available at that time when it's released. A second announcement has to do with EEA's draft climate change assessment, which will be available for public comment. Please check this link, which is going up in the chat, for background information at this time. The site at this link will be updated with the draft report and a survey form, sort of a quick way to respond. The alternatives are to write out a whole set of comments or to take the survey. And it will be available at this link on November 2nd. We're asking for comments either through the form or through other written material by November 16th. There's a 2-week comment period for the climate change assessment. Thank you very much. So we will move on to, unless there's any questions about those announcements, which I'll pause for a moment in case anybody does. Okay, next slide, please, Val. At the last meeting, we had a short meeting and it was jam-packed with a lot of information, and we met many members of the EJ task force for EEA, and we did not have time to debrief on those presentations during that meeting. So I'd like to take the opportunity to do that now. Next slide, please, Val. So just by way of reminder, the task force was convened in September 2020 under the auspices of EEA's EJ office. So it has 21 members, each one representing one of EEA's 6 agencies or major programs and offices. The representatives that are listed here are the primary points of contact for their programs, for their agencies and offices, both internally and externally. And they also disseminate communication and information across the EEA agencies themselves. So I just wanted to remind you of the individuals that we met at the last meeting and their affiliations. Next slide, please, Val. Also at the last meeting, we heard from 6 task force members to get a very high-level overview of EEA's EJ work on the environmental, energy, and climate and agricultural sectors. We also heard some ways in which the definition of EJ population affects their work. So I'd like to open up at this time, I'd like to open up the floor for any comments or impressions about what we heard at the last meeting, especially as we lay the foundation for our upcoming work regarding the definition of EJ population. So I'll just pause here and we can all sit through a bit of an uncomfortable silence, because I do think it's worth it for us to talk a little bit about the subject matter that we all heard about last time. About any initial responses to what folks heard from the EJ task force. We did have a question last time. I think it was you, Marcos, where you had asked whether there were going to be any formal metrics kept, especially with the Clean Energy Center with Mass CEC. And that group was planning on some type of metrics into the future. I think it is a question that's pertinent to all of the agencies. And so in terms of what this council does, keeping track of EJ advancements for the Commonwealth now and into the future, I felt that that question was pertinent to all of the programs as they went along, and something that, you know, I'd like to see across the Secretariat.
Rishi, if I can just add to that too, that after that meeting, Deneen Simpson contacted me as well, just to let me know by email that she'd been thinking about that as well, with regard to coming up with metrics for enforcement and permitting that she's hoping to be able to share with the EJ Council as well. So again, for everybody else, Deneen Simpson is the Director of Environmental Justice. So she program manager for BPE.
For the Department of Environmental Protection.
Yes, sorry, for DP.
We've had a request for council members to just state their names before they speak for a matter of the minutes.
This is Kalila. Yeah, I mean, it was helpful to hear an overview, although it was just like a lot of information, kind of fast and furious. So I definitely did not retain everything. And so my question is, in terms of any follow-up or, kind of getting to understand a little bit better how the departments are relating to environmental justice, how would you suggest that we do that? Is there an opportunity for additional conversation? Or is that something during the meetings, or is that something that we're expected to do kind of on our own?
I certainly, this is Rishi, I certainly think that we could ask representatives from any of the agencies in which we are wanting more information to come in. Everybody had said they would be willing to do that. I especially think that, I don't know what others on the council think. I sometimes feel like if we got all of the energy agencies in at one time, there would be a way that they speak to each other and that we would be able to glean information that, as a subject, more holistically than we can by treating each agency separately. So there's that piece of it as well, so that we could see how the agencies are interacting. I don't know how others feel about that. I mean, that as we continue on, I want to keep that door open, have people come back in. And is there anything that you all would feel would be helpful at this point? Like Kalila, you're raising this. Is there anything that you feel would be informative in terms of your areas of expertise?
This is Lydia Lowe. Yeah, I feel a little bit like Kalila. There's, I thought it was really great to hear from the people from different departments, but it's a little overwhelming to me. I don't, I feel like I need, because every agency, in every area has their own plans and it's all new to me. So I'm just wondering, is there some summary that you can recommend of these different state plans that we should be familiarizing ourselves with?
This is Cheryl Holly. I feel the same way as Lydia. Is there like an overall plan or goal that the state is moving towards at all of these different agencies and departments? Because they're all doing different and various things. And I guess it wasn't clear to me if they're all leading to the same place. So if they are all leading to the same place, I was wondering what that place might be.
So I think that what the task force does is give a broad overview of all, and you're right, it's a lot of information so quickly. When we dive into our specific subject matter, for instance, today we'll be looking at the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, and then we'll also be looking at specific questions around the EJ population definition. I was hoping that the background in terms of meeting people at the task force and seeing what they were doing would provide some context for these more specific questions that we could be addressing. I'm not sure that it's possible to comprehend everything that's happening across the Secretariat in a quick and easy way, even over several years. The task force presentation was meant to just provide a context in which I think of this council as addressing specific questions. and the background would also provide the ability to say, hey, I think we as a council should look at this issue that, we heard about at the task force.
Yeah, I was just gonna offer that I think part of the challenge, perhaps, I think it was helpful to have that like context, and because we haven't quite started yet to dig into like one of our kind of key priorities, it still feels like, how do all these pieces fit together? So perhaps it'll make sense, as we start to get deeper into the work too.
There are other thoughts that people had in that? Were there questions?
I agree with that last comment very much. Learning as I go here.
I think we all are, Ari, there's an aspect here, I think, where this council has come together with its different areas of expertise to see how we're going to function in this space.
Rishi, it's just as a question of procedure. So is the thought, and first it was helpful to have you kind of frame up what expectations were, that we weren't supposed to come away from the last presentation understanding how everything works, because that's not possible in that time frame. But is the thought then that, for instance, if we're digging in on one particular aspect of the definition of an environmental justice community, that we could go to specific agencies and ask them to come in to either give feedback or give us comments on just to get further information? Or would we actually like submit a formal data request and kind of bring that back to the group? Or is that kind of how you're thinking that would work based on now our general working knowledge of who does what?
I think either one of those models is true. I mean, the availability of either specific data or having people come in to talk to us about particular things, those are both possibilities for us. And I think we should feel that in exploring, say, the EJ population definition, we should do that and ask, how is this gonna affect a particular program, or how does it need to be tailored?
Thank you.
This is Marcos Luna again. So I think I appreciated the last meeting to hear from the different representatives from agencies, and it left me with more questions about how EJ is integrated or getting integrated across Massachusetts state government and its various agencies, because my understanding is that every office should have some kind of EJ plan and some way of communicating what that plan is and how they plan to get there. And I think I don't have a lot of questions specifically, but I do have a recommendation that they all should be posting their environmental justice plans and describing how they are meeting the spirit of the law that passed in 2021 that established environmental justice policy or definitions rather. So, I mean, I think that would make it easier, not just for us, but for others to see what these different agents or different departments are doing, and also as a matter of accountability about how they're accomplishing that. So I think that would go a long way without necessarily creating too much more work. So that's the one thing I'm still left wondering is, what are the plans? And if I wanted to look them up, where would I look?
I'm hoping that the strategies that will be coming out in mid-November will actually serve that purpose, Marcos. I mean, those strategies, the individual agency strategies were put together by their own staff, with the task force members being the point people. And they both combined together become the entire EEA EJ strategy, but they are all, relevant to their own specific agencies and offices. So perhaps my hope is that document will fill that type of, it'll be a roadmap for how the agency intends to proceed. Are there any other comments on this? So I just would say, let's just keep the task force and the material they presented to us and sort of in the back of our minds as we move forward. And, the way that Kalila and Caroline were talking about, we can pull them in when we need to and get additional information from them as needed. I think we should put up the next slide, Val. So just moving on to our next topic here. We've invited folks from the Clean Energy and Climate Plan back. So we have Han, who is back with us to speak with us about the CECP, which Han told us about at the last meeting. So I'm hoping that folks were able to either review this long document or at least view the video presentation that's hosted on our EEA YouTube site. So the reason that we're bringing this up now is that the CECP, the public comment period ended on October 21. But since our meeting that was to occur during the public comment period was canceled, we want to use this meeting to put together a set of comments, high-level comments from our discussion here today, and see whether we can agree on a set of comments that we would submit jointly to EEA as the EJC comments on the CECP. So I will hand it over to Han to do a quick reminder overview of the content of the CECP. And I think we were also to put the link to the video in the chat, just so that people would have it again if they needed it. So Han, I will hand it over to you.
Right. Thank you, Rishi. And thank you for having me back. The Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2050, that plan, we're doing the drafting now, given the timeline that we have to get it out the door and submit to legislators by the end of this year. And so that's why our public comment period has been expedited. But we really do cherish any feedback that you can provide during this meeting on this plan. And Rishi has asked me to provide a Cliff Note version of the presentation. So I'll try to do that. There's a lot to cover. It's a pretty comprehensive plan, but I'll try to do that as best as I can. So bottom line is that the 2050 Clean Energy and Climate Plan proposes a 85% emissions reduction and achievement of net zero. So we will drive down fossil fuel and other greenhouse gas emissions down to an 85% level below the 1990 baseline, at least. And then we are going to offset or balance the remaining residual emissions with sequestration happening on our natural working lands, as well as additional carbon sequestration from engineered solutions and natural working land sequestration outside of Massachusetts. And we have a host of policies within each of the sectors to achieve the greenhouse gas emissions reduction for each of those sectors. And so highlight for transportation, I'll highlight these ones that are more EJ focused. So highlight for transportation that's EJ focused is that we want to continue to expand consumer incentives for electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. And we want to make sure that we continue to invest in our public transit for buses and bike and walking. And the highlight for buildings is that we are working with the Commission on Clean Heat, and they have submitted preliminary recommendations and have been working really hard to flesh those recommendations out. But their preliminary recommendation says that they recommend that the administration to set up a clearinghouse so that consumers like you and me and everyone else can contact that clearinghouse and will be able to get technical advice technical assistance and financial assistance for everything that has to do with building decarbonization. So like how to make your home more efficient, how to make your home cleaner by having incentives for heating systems running on electric heat pumps or mini splits, some people call it mini splits, or like how to have incentives for water heaters and stove and other appliances running on clean energy, as well as potentially like how to install like other clean energy technologies such as solar. So this will be a clearinghouse for consumers to call. So there is not chasing around different consultants and different companies on quotes. Additionally, there's the preliminary recommendation mentioned a comprehensive statewide public education and outreach program for everyone about the plan to decarbonize our buildings. For power, there's a lot of focus on making sure that we can provide the energy for our cars in our buildings with clean and renewable energy sources. And so from a EJ perspective, we want to make sure that we are procuring these renewable energy from a cost-effective basis, so it doesn't increase impact rates too much. But then also like the siting of them will make sure that we consider EJ populations and make sure that they are not being overburdened by siting. And then for non-energy and industrial sectors, the highlight here is that we want to continue to implement the solid waste master plan, making sure that we reduce solid waste in our waste stream down to a 95 or 90% level in 2050, and that would mean better recycling assistance and making sure that the waste stream has less plastic, and so in the combustion of those waste will have less of a health impact and greenhouse gas emissions impact on communities surrounding those facilities. And then for our national working lands, for policies that try to increase sequestration, we also want to think about their co-benefits to the EJ community. So we have set a goal of planting 64,400 acres of new riparian and urban tree cover by 2050 to make sure that we can sequester, but then also provide cool shades to communities around these trees. That's in a nutshell. There's a lot more to cover, and I really recommend you listen to the presentation and dig into the slide deck. But I just wanted to give you a really quick cliff note. And now, there are a lot of cross-cutting policies as well. And we want to make sure that we support workforce development and make sure that those workforce development programs help underrepresented communities such as women-owned, people of color, and those in the EJ communities be able to access a lot of these good, clean jobs. And then we also want to make sure that we have a specific investment goal that benefit EJ communities or EJ populations and/or EJ populations. And so we put forth a process for us to continue to work with the EJ task force and with you all on identifying what investments are happening now. Sorry, what clean energy and climate investments are happening now in EJ communities. How could we, what metrics to best track in the future, and what goals should we set? And then we can implement on that. And so that's in a really quick nutshell, the cross-cutting policies proposed for the 2050 CECP. I see there are questions in the chat.
Yeah, I was gonna, Rishi, we have questions from the public in the chat that I'm unable to answer, that Han would need to answer. So I didn't know if you wanted those now or to wait until the end. You're on mute.
I'd like to wait till the end and give the council a chance to ask questions to Han and also speak about what in their review of the document they felt was important.
Okay, so just let me know.
We
when
can
you're
hold
ready.
that question till the end. I'd like to get to it, but please just ask that person to hold it till the end.
Okay, thank you.
I see Marcos' hand up.
Thank you. So this is Marcos Luna. I did review the document, and Hung, thank you very much for that presentation. That's amazingly efficient for so much. So I think a recommendation in general across the board in terms of the metrics.
Marcos, I'm just so sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know Han is going to be taking notes of this. I should have said this earlier. She's just going to be taking notes on comments that people are raising right now. And then what we will do is go through a process of trying to, categorize what we hear from all of the council members, and then and winnow it down to some things that we can agree on. So I just wanted to let you know about the process for why you might see Han copying down what you're saying, what we hope to do with those comments from all of you as we go forward. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Thank you. So in general, I think I would like to see I'd like to see information about where the investments are happening in terms of new green energy projects or infrastructure in general. Definitely with regard to expanding tree planting, definitely want to know how much of that is taking place in EJ communities. I think across the board, since so much of the EJ approach is geographic, the geography of anything that happens is extremely important. And I would say that is not just about new projects like plantings or new energy infrastructure, but also for just decarbonization efforts. So for example, as we're looking at how to transition from fossil fuels, where is the decarbonization happening first, or where's the most activity? Because one thing that I worry about is that some communities will be able to take advantage more of these opportunities before others, and it might leave some communities stranded with old infrastructure. And certainly with regard to any kind of infrastructure that has emissions related to it, so we're talking about power plants or industry in general that emits pollutants of some sort. I know that the goals for decarbonization and reducing our emissions for the state are statewide goals, of course, but it matters to the communities where these emissions are happening. And so I think what we worry about too is that we don't want the emissions to continue in EJ communities, even while the rest of the state might be reducing its emissions on net. That won't be good enough for those communities that have already been dealing with these burdens for so long. So I think we'd want to see those emissions reductions to take place first and prioritize those communities that have already been enduring those emissions. So those are my initial thoughts, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. I think I think it was Caroline, and then I saw Cheryl's hand up, and then Kalila.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to actually just get a little bit more information and insight on how, I appreciate the appreciation for how much infrastructure actually needs to be built to bring renewables into to electrify building sector and transport. And so as we're considering siting and making sure that the EJ populations aren't overburdened by siting, how do we envision that happening, especially given the pace at which that infrastructure needs to be built to bring the renewables into the region?
Are you asking what is proposed in the plan to address that?
Yes, a little bit more of what's proposed and and asking to consider some consideration on kind of how we're going to balance additional consideration, which I think is absolutely I'm supportive of, with the streamlining of the process as a whole, so that we can actually, we don't get tied up in siting for 20 years.
Yeah, you touch on a very hard balance there. Yes, we want to make sure that we implement the cumulative impact assessment that is required now for our projects. How do we make sure renewable and clean energy projects can continue to be cited at a pace that is not going to be bogging down? That's a really good question, and I'll connect with my colleagues to see like what is proposed there. But yeah, I'll put that down as feedback.
Thank you.
I think we had
Thank you.
Cheryl.
Thank you. This is Cheryl Holly. I was wondering about your transportation goals, how most cars and trucks will be electric by 2050. And is there a plan in place for EJ communities or lower income communities to convert to electric cars? I mean, those are very expensive, and out of most people's they're not able to afford those types of vehicles. So is there a plan? I mean, I know people who still drive 20-year-old cars. So in 30 years, some of them will still be driving 20-year-old cars and they won't be electric.
Yeah.
So is there, I mean, it just seems like a really big goal. Especially, and you can't say all those people are going to go into public transportation, like take away their cars and all use public transportation, because here in Central Mass and Western Mass, we don't really have a lot of public transportation. So I'm just wondering if you've taken that into consideration, and I know you can't answer my question, but if that would be, part of your plan.
Yeah, I can answer. Yeah, we do intend to expand consumer incentives at the point of sale, so that anyone who's interested in buying EVs could get the reduction in the sale price at the dealership. And I believe, I have to talk to my colleague Dan Gotti, but I believe we are also thinking about how to expand the incentives to used vehicles as well. And I know the federal government through the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, have proposed incentives, increased incentives for both new and used EVs. Should I put this down as a comment that we want to be mindful of the cost of the EVs to low and moderate income consumers and EJ residents?
I almost wonder, Cheryl, if what you're saying is that this state should have some planning around how we can have EV uptake in in the EJ neighborhoods. Are you asking for a plan? Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, how can you expect cleaner air if all the older cars are emitting, whatever in those neighborhoods? I mean, or if people are penalized because they can't afford an electric car, they can't drive their gas car anymore. They can't afford an electric car. Yeah, I mean, this is for, EJ people, moderate income people, elderly people. I mean, there's a lot of folks that can't afford that sort of high end, no matter what the dealership says. Not everybody buys their cars from dealerships. So, you're talking about credit and all kinds of things. So I just wanted the state had a plan for
Mhm.
everyone.
Thank you, Cheryl. So I see Kalila and then Ari and then Lydia.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just want to say that I am in agreement with the questions, comments, concerns that have been lifted up, and wanted to also just build off of Cheryl's last comment around the transportation pieces, and just, from what I can see from the version that we were sent, one, it seems like, there are listed here targets around, and a couple of examples of targets and metrics around EVs and public charging stations, but there really isn't anything concrete around promoting alternatives to personal vehicles. It's just sort of described as kind of a broad category. And so I think, obviously, given the crisis going on in our public transportation system, we need more specific attention to that, and much clearer targets and metrics for how that will be addressed through this plan. I think the other question that I have, particularly around the buildings portion of it, is, one of the longstanding challenges that around energy efficiency is access to energy efficiency resources. And so I know there has been a lot of work done over a number of years to increase who has access to those resources, which is great. But I still have questions about to what extent these resources are really being made available to renters. And so I think, just in a similar way, around the way that Cheryl was talking about, like, okay, how real people are buying cars and access to credit and stuff like that. Many of these programs are just designed for homeowners. And so what the state needs to have a response there. And then the last thing, and I apologize because maybe I just missed this in what folks were saying in our last conversation, but around the cross-cutting and enabling policies, one of the exciting opportunities that we have through creating a just clean energy economy is the opportunities for folks to be able to work in a variety of these new jobs that will be created around energy efficiency, all of transportation, all of that. And so I don't have clarity about how those opportunities will be advancing the needs of EJ communities.
Thank you.
Sorry, just want to make sure I take notes correctly. More clarity on how
how the investments that the state is promoting and making will advance good quality jobs for environmental justice communities.
Thank you, Kalila. Did you need any more clarification, Han, on any of the comments so far? I should have been asking as we were going through the comments. Do the people who commented so far feel like the notes have accurately stated, what their concerns were? If not, we can edit as needed. Han, may I move on to Ari, or do you need a moment?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for your presentation there. And I apologize if I had missed something as well, but in industry, will your group also look at targeting the carbon footprint of some of these in the industries old and new? For example, I am in the cannabis industry and I'm in the retail side. But I have to say, because this is kind of, once again, a tough spot, is that the cannabis industry is going to provide millions of jobs in many ways, yet the carbon footprint on the cannabis industry, as far as inside growing, is massive. It is a major drain on the environment and energy. Do you look at that as far as, I don't know, regulations and laws, from the water to the electricity to the lighting? I mean, opposed to, for example, outside growing when we're just using the natural sun and farming. I mean, I'm not exactly looking for an answer, but it's a massive industry that provides tons of jobs and jobs for people, entry-level jobs. Yet inside grow is a massive, massive drain. And I'm someone in the industry and I buy from some of these companies and I try to find companies that are smaller and outside grows as they come onto the market. So I guess I'm just asking a question more about how we can protect the environment in that way.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not in the building sector. So I can't speak too well to this, but I know that we have to have sector sub limits. So have to have a limit on each of the sectors. So for buildings, we have a limit on residential heating and commercial heating. And then we have a limit on electric power use. So in 2050, we are assuming that as we procure a lot of renewable and clean energy, that the electricity use will be getting cleaner and cleaner. And so the issue here would not necessarily be emissions, because if we are procuring our offshore wind and solar and other renewable energy and clean energy on pace, the electricity use should be cleaner and cleaner. So the issue would be more of like a energy efficiency issue. So how could we increase the efficiency of the electricity usage? And so,
Yes.
So what is proposed in the power sector is advanced grid, where we have smart metering and reform of electricity rates. How exactly those electricity rates and smart charging applies to the industry, that I don't know, but that's a really good flag for us.
I mean, it's like, do you require solar in places that could have solar? I mean, I know it's a deeper question, but just so everybody knows, I'm just going to put this out there so people understand. To create one pre-roll in an inside grow facility is like comparable to driving 23 miles in your car. Like, digest that. That's crazy. And I'm done.
Thank you, Ari, with that last shocking factoid. And Han, are you good? Can we move on, or do you, I'll give you a minute. Okay.
I can.
Okay, all right, Lydia, I saw your hand up.
I think, Lydia, you're on mute.
In terms of promoting building decarbonization, I had a question about, beyond just the existing incentive, publicizing the existing incentive programs. And like, I know there are certain pilots that are happening, but whether there's like a I think it's important to look at, you know, who is accessing these incentives. You know, are EJ communities actually, you know, accessing them equitably? I don't think so. And then what are some of the systems and bureaucracies that are as well as, you know, economic issues that are obstacles, you know, for EJ communities to be able to, you know, decarbonize buildings.
Lydia, are there any specific incentives that come to mind for you that, or are you saying sort of across the board, let's see if the plan is
I
working?
feel like across the board, you know, these programs, I think that the programs are being accessed more. My sense is are being accessed more in suburban communities and by homeowners. And, you know, a lot of people in EJ communities who have, you know, suffered the most burdens historically are not really gaining the benefit of these programs. And sometimes when we have tried to promote more awareness and access to the programs, there are just a lot of different obstacles to actually do the energy efficiency work or actually advance electrification of a building, which some of which are built into, some of them are economic because of the costs involved of doing a lot of work on older buildings that may be in disrepair before you can do some of that work. And then some of them are kind of systems in terms of how the programs are designed in different silos and, you know, how working on one piece of a building, you know, relates to building code and the things that you would need to do in order to decarbonize a building, you know, touches off other building code issues. So I just think like a kind of a more systemic look at what the obstacles are would be helpful.
So Val, I don't see any other hands up. Do you from your view?
No, I don't see any.
Was there anybody else who wanted to comment? If not, I thought we could go back and just review what some of these were and see if we could categorize them, Han. Is that what you would feel would be most helpful for you?
I could, yes, I could categorize them, but seeing how there's not a whole lot, we could forgo categorization, but I could do that quickly now, if you like.
Well, I just want to also, if the view that you have up on the screen right now, if that's all of the comments, I just want people to actually check to see that what's been transposed into these comments is actually captures what you said. And if folks wanted to make any edits to do that, I'd like to offer that we do an informal straw poll on these comments in a few minutes to see if we can agree to have them submitted to EEA as the EJC's comments on the draft CECP. So that's why I'm asking in particular if folks had edits to what they said here.
Sorry, am I distracting you all with my
No,
camera?
not at all. No, hon, it's giving people a chance to actually review the comments and just see if, you know, they would, I'm hoping if people are able to review with the thought of whether this can capture what was said today from the EJC to submit. So if folks could just take a moment as Han is working to see, in fact, that if we just took a straw poll, if folks would be willing to agree to submit this on behalf of our group.
What form will the submission take? Like, are you all crafting a letter on our behalf or?
Kalila, this would, we would just submit these, the bullets themselves as a written comment form from the council. The other option that I wanted to offer to folks, which Han had suggested as well, is that if individually, if folks wanted to submit more substantial comments, not as part of the EJC, that Han had said that her program could take them in. It wouldn't, you know, they will certainly read and review them. It wouldn't be considered coming in under the public comment period because that closed on the 21st. But that if you had more substantial narrative that you wanted to add from your point of view, you're welcome to do that as well. Did I capture that correctly, Han?
Yes, we'll be reading it. Whether or not it'll be synthesized and included with the rest of the 2050 CCB comments that were submitted on or before the deadline. It's hard to say at this point, depending on like how late the comments come in.
Part of my, you know, I'll put this out to the group. Part of why I feel like it's important for the EJC to submit a joint set of comments, whether or not more specific narrative ones come in individually, is because this group is just up and starting. And, you know, we have a voice in the Commonwealth that other groups don't have. And I think it's important to be on the record for something that is a statewide endeavor like CECP, to have something in there. Which is why I present that idea.
And I had a question for Han. Will the questions posted in the chat be included in the comments? So questions that are coming in from participants.
They will not be included as comments.
Okay, thank you.
It has to go through either email to us or on a portal, but the portal we probably won't be checking the portal at this point. So if anyone wants to submit comments for us to read, and I'm sure, you know, we will read them, will be on GWSA at mass.gov, and I can put that in the chat.
Han, you're saying you would read the comments that come in through the portal?
Correct. I
Okay.
personally will. So, and I'll try to forward along to relevant people. And if it's not incorporated into the 2050 CCB comments, it will still be read by the relevant folks.
The specialists who are in each of the sectors.
Yeah.
So what happens to like our comments and the public's comments on the CECP?
So yeah, we have started synthesizing those comments already on like topics and who's making those type of comments, like industries versus residents versus various things, just to get a better sense of what are the feedback and who's making those type of feedback. And we're trying to incorporate whatever feedback we can into the 2050 CECP draft right now. Actually, we had a meeting about it today where we said, oh, someone said this, and okay, can we incorporate it? Okay, well, we'll incorporate it. And so we plan to have a a summary of all the feedback that have been submitted, but it won't be like who says what. It will be like pulled into key themes and key topics. And then we'll have a response to those key themes.
And that synthesis will be shared with the public, or who does that get shared with?
Right. It does get shared with the public. It will be an appendix to the Clean Energy and Climate Plan and posted on our website. It's kind of like the 2030 Clean Energy and Climate Plan. We had thousands and thousands of comments
Right.
through the course of 2 years or a year. And so we synthesized those into Appendix F, and we posted all the appendices on our online website. So it'll be in a document, some type of appendix document.
Han, this is Caroline Hahn. I was just regarding the energy siting. It's just a nuance because I think you've captured the gist of the comment. But I just want to make sure that what I want to say is that I want careful consideration, like to consider the EJ concerns and make sure that they aren't overridden by the need for speed and a streamlined siting process. So I think that it's just a flip of like where does that go, and that's really the perspective.
If there's no more questions, I will just present this question to the group again of whether folks feel that this would be worthwhile to submit these comments to EEA as coming from the EJC or not. If we could speak about that, it would be useful discussion, I think. Are there any objections to doing that by way of process? Are there any objections to us agreeing on a document to submit these comments as coming from the EJC?
I think we should move forward with this. I think it's very important.
I mean, I see a lot of nodding heads. I mean, I'd sort of like to go down the list. I mean, this is not necessarily a formal vote, but could we take this as like a poll around agreement for doing this?
I mean, I think I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Khalil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for most of these comments, I am in agreement with them. And at the same time, I also feel like we should have had more time to do this exercise. Yeah, because I think if we had a little bit more time, there are other areas that we could have thought of that, could have been included. And I think it's, yeah.
So
I mean, I understand that the deadline has passed. But I just want to for the record, I think this is not the best way to do this.
So I would just like to say for the record, I agree with you. And, if we had, I think a little better idea about the way that the startup of this group of the EJC starting up, and then the timeline that we had for the CECP, if we had a little better perspective on that, we would have given this group more time to look at it. And especially since we had so much trouble logistically with these meetings, and we're now going forward with obtaining a vendor to help us with these meetings. We canceled that last EJC meeting, which I think would have framed this nicely. We could have done what we're doing with Han at the last meeting, and then we could have sort of resolved or had maybe meatier comments that we individually prepared and brought to folks to resolve more completely at this meeting. I totally agree with you, Kalila. That would have been my preference too. And, I'll be looking to do that in organizing these meetings going forward for this type of endeavor.
Can I just ask one more question? This is Cheryl Holly. I'm just wondering if the folks that created this plan could go through the plan before they submit it and just look at it with a EJ community perspective, you know what I mean? Because like Leah was saying, there's like so many other things in there that we really didn't have a chance to look at or think about deeply. So if the people who wrote it can maybe re-look at it from that point of view, because some of the things won't work for EJ communities. And I mean, is the state gonna kick those folks out or, you know, fine them for the rest of their existence because they cannot meet those standards? I just think it needs to be looked at again. It's just, for me, it's for, you know, wealthier people and not for those with moderate or low incomes.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that comment. As someone who is a co-author, yeah, I think we are trying to draft the Clean Energy and Climate Plan with EJ considerations in mind. And that said, it's always great to make sure that we engage with you all and then with the public and many other stakeholders to make sure that how we drafted it is appropriate. But I also wanted to say that this plan is, I'd say it's kind of like a planning document for the Commonwealth. It doesn't shape specific programs. It says that these are the greenhouse gas emissions reduction we need to get, and these are some of the things we can do to get to those. But it's a planning document to have state agencies and offices and partners to then shape programs. And so in the shaping of, for example, the More EV program, making sure the incentives are at the level that can be accessible to moderate and low income communities. Like, what is that dollar amount? How do we get the incentives to those consumers? Those are the type of programmatic design discussions and decisions that need to be made at the state agency and office level. And so we're very mindful of that, and we want to make sure that programmatic and regulatory processes that stem out of these commitments in this Clean Energy and Climate Plan do have a very robust stakeholder engagement process and hear from everyone.
I see Kalila's hand up again and then Peter's.
I'm happy to have Peter go first since I've already spoken. So go for it, Peter.
I appreciate it, Kalilia. So Hong, thank you for sharing that detail. I'd like to pull on that thread a little bit about the programmatic design, and I'm assuming the tactical execution thereafter. As the design is happening, what mechanisms are the folks who are designing it within these agencies using to test the concept with the potential impacted EJ groups? Is it going to be a transparent process where we might have some additional input into the tactical implementation and design, or is this something that rests solely within the agencies?
Yeah, good question. Great question. It will be a mixture of state agency consulting with the stakeholders, but then also having a public process. For example, in our Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2030, the interim one that was released at the end of 2020, we said that we want to have a specialized building code where we can have adopters, I guess, of the municipalities with these building codes can make sure that the new buildings constructed will be ready in 2050. So it have all the electrical wiring to handle all the electrification. So we set that in the plan, and during the process, the programmatic design process, the Department of Energy Resources, they put out different straw proposals. They posted on their website. They reached out to their stakeholder list and try to disseminate the information out widely. And they have, I think, 5 or 7 public hearings on the proposal and on the draft regulations. And so this took 2 years. And then now, just recently in September, they are finalizing that regulation. It's been submitted to the Secretary of State, and it will get promulgated next year, January 1, I guess, for any municipalities who want to opt into this. So we set it in the interim plan for 2030 DOER. Well, that also give credit to the legislators. The legislators put it into the 2021 climate law, and DOER went through a 1-year process, 1.5-year process to develop it, and now it's gonna get promulgated. And so it's a mixture of like state agencies working on it, with hearing from stakeholders from different like industry groups, and then going to the public.
Thanks for sharing.
Kalila?
Yeah, I guess one thing that is becoming clear to me that I'm not sure I quite understand is how our specific work on the definition fits into the creation and execution of these programs. So it's I guess a little bit related to the last question, but what role is that playing? Are there adjustments that will be made? How is that going to play out?
So the role of this council is both general promotion of general EJ principles as defined in the Climate Act, and also specifically the comprehensive analysis of the EJ population definition. So because this CECP is a major initiative of EEA, it's correct. The EJC is correctly in its purview to be commenting on it. I think Han's point before is that CECP is a planning document. It's not the actual implementation of any of these policies. That's a more specific task to see how these broad goals are going to be implemented everywhere in the Commonwealth, including in the EJ neighborhoods. So I think, I heard Peter say at the beginning of his question of, are we going to have any input on tactical implementation? And I would think that in key programs, we would, especially the ones that are going to be affecting EJ communities in major ways. This is what we can pull in that type of review under the EJC. So, and again, I'm going to go back to what I said before, is that given the timeline of how this group started up, it's in its nascent stage, and the timeline of where the CECP was wrapping up this very long process, the 2-year process that Han referred to, this is what we could fit together. We're sort of, I see this as, I see this document as like, this is our initial step here. We're talking about the CECP. We're getting acquainted with the goals of this very broad planning document. And once we've done that in this context, we've intersected with its launch, we can proceed in the future in a more specific way, better informed.
And if I can add, I think depending on the definition of EJ communities, because I said in our proposal that we would want to work with the EJ Task Force and the EJ Council to assess what investments are going to EJ communities and what metrics and goal we want to set in the future for these type of investments. So the definition of EJ communities will help us figure out like, okay, where the investments are going and who's going to benefit, to answer your question really narrowly.
Thanks, Han. Marcos has his hand up, and I'm just conscious of time. I'm wondering if after Marcos's comment question, if we can go ahead and see if we have some agreement on these and then move on to the next topic. However, we're going to address the CEC piece of this. So, Marcos, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I echo the concern about the amount of information we're digesting and this quickly. And I also appreciate setting the precedent that the council weighs in on these really important policy initiatives that are happening at the state level. And it feels like weighing in at the high level, like at a planning level, is appropriate. And it would be nice that we get a rhythm of it, and that we establish this kind of process, and folks in different agencies get used to checking in with us in a way that we can all talk and get a heads up early enough to weigh in and decide how deep in the weeds we want to get into it as well, at the implementation level, or devising other ways that we can kind of be on top of these things, because there's a lot of stuff always going on at the state level. So I can appreciate it's nearly impossible for any individual to follow all the things that are going on. So I think this is a good start. However, creaky or clunky at the beginning it is. So and I just want to say off the bat, I'm in favor of putting our comments collectively out there, just so we get in the habit of doing it, even if it's not perfect.
I'd like to hear, I mean, let me just run down the list if people are in agreement with that. So Marcos, you say yes. Kalila, how about you? I'm just going to go down the list.
Okay, yes.
Okay. Melissa's not here. Cheryl?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Caroline?
Yes.
Namratha's not here. Lydia?
Yes.
Thank you, Lydia. Peter?
Yes.
And then Patricia's not here, and so Ari. which I heard
Yes.
you say. Okay, great. So why don't we do that? We will go ahead and submit these. We'll submit them even, we are on record in our minutes that several people have said here that this is too much material too fast, and that we haven't been able to look at this in the detail that it deserves. And that in future initiatives of this sort, and even smaller initiatives, we would hope to be exposed to the material sooner and be drawn into the process sooner. So Han, thank you so much. If you don't need anything else from us, which let me just confirm that with you.
No.
Okay.
I'm here whenever you need me, but.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Han. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but maybe we can make up some time here. Val, if you could put up our next slide. So I think so we are here, excuse me a second here, let me find where I am. So the next item on the agenda is our discussion of the work product of this council. So next slide, please, Val. So previously we had discussed the options for the form that we would like our work product to take. And at our second meeting, we had discussed the options that appear on this slide. I think I captured them all here. And this is again the way that after we have looked at and done our analysis of the EJ population definition, how would we report out on our work? So the first option was an oral report to the secretary and senior staff at EEA in an EJC meeting like this under the open meeting law. The second option that was presented was a written report to the secretary, which would be available as a public document. A third option is essentially both. The written report that we would polish and be able to share as a public document, but it would also be accompanied with a verbal report out at an EJC meeting like this. So I don't know if there were any other options or if there were any other thoughts people had to add to this, but I was hoping we could get some kind of agreement as we move forward in our work now to see where we were headed in the product itself. So could we just have a little bit of discussion about this, about people's preferences? The second paragraph here that I have, the process options. My feeling is we may not need to address that right now. Let's sort of get our product goals in line, and then we can see about the different ways that we could reach them. But let me just open up the floor for this discussion. If I've missed anything on this slide, please let me know and we can add that. Caroline, I see your hand up.
Rishi, I apologize if I missed it. Is the third option for the work product with the written report, is it also available as a public document, and would that meeting also be under open meeting law?
Yes, so that would, exactly. I'm just gonna have a little cough off screen and I'll be back. Were there any comments or questions? It would be great if anybody had a preference that they just put that into the hat right now, because I felt that when we first spoke about this at that previous meeting, people seem to have had a preference. Cheryl, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I prefer either 2 or 3. It doesn't really matter to me. But yeah, definitely a written report so the public can see.
And
Anybody else?
Lydia wrote in the chat number 3.
Okay. Anyone else?
I also support number 3.
And Ari typed up 2 in the chat, so Ari's saying 2.
Peter, number 3.
I would say
Sorry, go ahead.
number 3 seems good to me.
And number 3 for Marcos as well.
Marcos. Is there anybody other than me who didn't express a preference? I mean, I have to say, I prefer number 3 too. Ari, if we tell you that you don't have to come to that particular meeting, would you agree to 3?
Yeah, I don't know if it sounds funny, but I agree with 3 as well. I mean,
I thought, Kalila, oh yeah, Kalila, you said number 3 too. I have to say, I felt very much at the meeting that we first discussed this, that folks really wanted to go with both, with the combined effort, because it's a way to speak with the secretary and senior staff about highlighting some of our, major points. And then the report is so thorough and able to be distributed to anybody of interest. I mean, to me, that just really seems like the best option as well, I have to say. So, okay, if that's the case, well, why don't we move on? We won't spend any more time on that. Thank you for that. So let's keep that in mind, that we were looking to that as our work product, a combined written report and a verbal report out to the secretary and senior staff regarding the EJ population question. Peter, I see your hand up.
Yes, a very quick question from earlier on. This might be more procedural. So of the questions that we had coming in, are we able to, maybe not formally archive this, but I would love to have that for reference later on when the tactical discussions come up, because I think in some scenarios there's some key questions there that warrant some additional discussion perhaps.
So you're saying you would like to have the previous document that we had all
No, no, no,
today?
not the document. So in the Q&A portion of this, there's the questions that are listed out. Can we do like a grab and then just put those somewhere for reference later on?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. Okay,
And
thank
just to
you.
clarify, you're saying the questions being posted by participants in the Q&A box?
That's right, yes.
They will be preserved, Peter. Okay, so next slide, please, Val. And here we're coming to a pretty core part of this discussion. So some of us in the earlier meetings have spoken on this topic already, even at the first meeting where people spoke about who hasn't been included in the EJ population definition. So let's move on to the next slide, Val, please. So as a reminder, just so that we have this up in front of us, these are the criteria for EJ population definition is the second bullet. And we look at low-income populations, households with limited English proficiency, and neighborhoods of color. The last criteria, neighborhoods of color, the threshold percentages are different if we're looking at towns that are of moderate income or not. Another important factor here is the definition of neighborhood. Under the Act, neighborhood is linked with the US Census's definition of a block group. So we have this geographic component to it. And our last question is the important question there in red, who are missed by the current EJ population definition. So I would like to open that up for discussion. We have about 25 minutes here, and I do want to preserve some time for questions from the public. So this is less time than I would have thought, but it's giving us a start today. So if we can say that we can start this discussion for about 15 minutes or so, and then move on to questions from the public, we can we can continue this discussion and preserve some notes from this for our next meeting on November 9th. So I just want to open this up for discussion. Who are we missing in the current EJ population definition? Val, why don't we keep this slide up for a while during the discussion? I see Marcos's hand up and then Peter's.
So I see the policy on environmental justice has a provision in it that allows for communities to petition to be designated as environmental justice communities if they aren't automatically captured by the current criteria. And my understanding is it's still a little bit fuzzy about exactly how that they would do that or how it would be practically implemented if a community that, for example, is smaller than the census block group area, it doesn't get picked up by it, or maybe it's crossed. It falls in between two different census block groups and therefore gets diluted in some way. And so I could see that as a process, one thing that would be important would be to spell that out a little more clearly so that communities could know exactly how to begin that process of petitioning to be included. So that's one thing that's it's been a question for quite some time amongst a number of EJ advocate groups, I know. And then a second one, and then I'll stop. And we brought it up before at our previous discussion, was about Indigenous or Native American communities in particular who don't constitute large enough numbers to hit the thresholds that would get triggered by EJ communities. Yet we know that on the ground that those are very much affected communities who should be included in some way. And so I don't have a ready answer, but I know that those are two issues that need to be addressed.
Thanks, Marcos. Peter, please.
Just for confirmation of my understanding here and declaration of the word minorities, what's the definition? What's the working definition we're using for the term minorities?
Oh, well, that's such a good question, Peter. This is a tricky matter. There is in the EJ population, in the EJ policy, it is defined, and this, I can read it into the record. Minority refers to individuals who identify themselves as Latino, Hispanic, Black, African American, Asian, Indigenous people, and people who otherwise identify as non-white. So that definition does not appear in the statute. It appears in the 2017 EEA EJ policy.
Understood. Thank you.
Cheryl, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to add more to the indigenous communities. So indigenous communities, the boundaries of our homelands don't actually match the US Census Bureau or the state or the towns even. So that's why you wouldn't see maybe everybody in one neighborhood, because our neighborhoods transcend those boundaries. That's one population that I think is missing. And the other, I think we spoke about before, minorities or people with lower household incomes that live in rural areas, but still affected by environmental justice issues, especially in Central Mass or in Western Mass. You might not see, a 40% or 25% of all households in any neighborhood that meet these criteria. So I think those two should be added, indigenous and rural.
Are you saying, Cheryl, that somehow out in the rural areas, this definition doesn't capture the entire low income? Like, do you feel that under little I there, that is meant to capture low income Massachusetts residents? Are you saying that you feel out west that it fails to capture that?
Right, because you're looking at a neighborhood, right? You're looking at a defined area that meets that, and the neighborhoods might be larger there. I don't know what the census record says about those census block groups out there or here in Central Mass. But yes, I don't think that in less populated areas that those census block groups capture environmental justice populations.
Okay.
Correctly.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I also had a similar question to the one that Cheryl raised around the rural piece. And then another question that I have is in terms of the percentage thresholds that are listed. How did those come about? And is part of our charge to adjust those as needed?
I'll just answer quickly, and I'm hoping Marcos can add more meat to the answer. So historically, 1 and 2 were as they appear in the 2002 original EEA EJ policy definition of an EJ population. The minority criteria that appear in 2 and 4 in the earliest one appeared just as a 25% minority threshold without any additional criteria for the wealth or the not or affluence of the town in which it was situated. In 2002, that EJ policy and this definition was put together through a group called the MEJAC, the Massachusetts Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, which was a group of state agencies and some stakeholders that they had consulted with in putting together the definition. So it was kept through 2017, and then the definition as it appears now was as a result of the legislative process. But Marcos knows far more about that legislative process, I think, than anybody else here on the council.
So this is Marco. So I'll say, so Rishi did a nice summary of the origins go back at least to 2002. And my understanding from talking to folks who were involved at the time, like Veronica Eady, who was working at what's now EA, that was after consulting with groups across the state and having hearings with different stakeholders. They were focused on not a number per se, but identifying, capturing the communities that made sense to people about that these were areas where things were going on that were problematic, and that those numbers were revisited periodically over the years. And certainly in this last round for the 2021 climate law that incorporated the definition, it was sort of the same kind of process where we had representatives at the state and Senate level. We had different environmental justice advocacy groups and others that were involved, poring over maps essentially and looking to see which communities would fall under different criteria, sort of trying to play with the numbers. And at the end of the day, it seemed to be important to people to make sure they protected certain communities that kept coming up over and over again. And the numbers that were used seemed to fill the bill, but also provided a very accessible way of just finding them that wasn't too complicated, that would be understandable to most people when you presented to them. So the more complicated the definition, the harder it would be to explain and to folks. So the numbers are round numbers, if you notice, for one thing. So that's not by accident. And then certainly at the moment they were created, they seemed to capture, by the opinion of those who were participating, the communities that were of most concern. But again, as it's clear, they're not perfect. They include some communities that may be questionable. And then there's, as we're discussing now, a question about communities that get left out. So I think it's sort of a living document. And my understanding is that, the thresholds are definitely something that will need to be talked about periodically, right? Revisited. But that's kind of where the origins of where this comes from, is through that repeated process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kalila, because it's good to set that foundation for the discussion to come as well. So thank you for asking that question. It's 7:44. We will lose the interpreters at 8. I just want to make sure that we are able to address at least some of the questions from the public. We've covered a lot of substantial ground today. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that folks may have things to say about it out there. So unless anybody had any last things to say, I'd like to wrap up this discussion for now, continue it in the next meeting, and go to comments from the public. Are folks okay with that? Okay, Val, we can take this down. We just ask folks, if there's a lot of questions out there, to limit comments or questions to a couple of minutes. And we can also take down this slide, Val, and we can see each other in gallery mode. It might be a little easier.
Yeah, and so we'll be taking comments in the box and we'll also be taking verbal comments as well. So participants just need to raise their hand if there is a question. We did get a few in the box already, and a few of them, a good majority of them came from Jennifer Salonetti. So Jennifer, if you'd like, I can, you can pose your question verbally. There were a few and I didn't know which one you wanted to prioritize asking. Oh, so Jennifer put a question in the chat, so I'll just go ahead and read that one. While there are centralized areas of housing and industry, most of the population does not live in close proximity to centers of commerce. The Northern Berkshires is a rural area that has high unemployment and extensive poverty, which is often magnified in the communities that are marginalized. I believe there is a 13.8% poverty level. Massachusetts equals 10%, but this does not indicate the vast disparities according to race, immigration, and/or disability. The lack of employment opportunities and low-wage jobs paired with the exhaustion of navigating poverty, racism, anti-immigrant sentiment, and other factors often results in fracturing and isolation within the community. This isolation is amplified by institutional racism in the housing sector, school, and workplace. The lack of accountability and restitution leads to hopelessness and despair. So it was a comment. I apologize. It wasn't a question, but
I just want to say thank you to Jen Salonetti for that comment. And I also want to comment, I mean, this is in line, I think, with what Cheryl brought up earlier, the way in which I don't think the definition has fully taken into account the way that Massachusetts communities are structured out west from the way that they are structured, you know, in the eastern part of the state. And I see this as a recurring theme and something that we will have to address in the course of these discussions. And, you know, Jen's comment there, I think, nicely captures some of those issues.
So we have a hand raised. So Maria Belen, I'll give Maria Belen permissions to speak. But one other thing before I do that, the other questions in the Q&A, a lot of them are related to the CECP. And since Han isn't here, any questions that are in the Q&A box, I will try to get answers from Han for, and we'll post those to our webpage.
Val, I'm happy to hear. Let's have Maria Belen come on, and if we can just hear some of those questions as well from the CECP, let's try to answer what we can, if we can, and if we can't, we can follow through on the rest.
Okay, and I see Han is still here. I thought she had.
Oh,
left,
great.
but-
Okay, wonderful. All right, good. We can address all of them. Okay.
Yep. And then Maria Belen, you can go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
This is Maria Belen. I use she, her, hers. I'm with Green Roots, an environmental justice organization in Chelsea and East Boston. I just wanted to make just a comment around the conversation around siting infrastructure. I know it was a topic covered, and I know it's going to be a big part of the transition to clean energy and to the green economy. I think there's a big push to site a lot of infrastructure so that we transition the fastest way possible. And I just want to caution us, all of us, that we just need to be really careful about citing infrastructure just in the same ways that we have always done it. And so that there needs to be some changes that need to be implemented, especially in environmental justice communities. So in East Boston, we have a substation that is being cited that could be considered, you know, part of the transition, could be considered part of the how we transition to clean energy, and we're going to need more substations. But the siting of these infrastructures, I think, is really critical. And so, just in the conversations that you all were having around the clean energy plan, I think it's really important to consider the siting of these infrastructures and how we incorporate environmental justice into that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Belen. Val, are you able to read some of the CECP questions?
Give me one moment.
And I did see Han on my screen and there you are, Han. Okay.
Yeah, so one of the questions was, how will these energy efficiency measures work for renters?
Good question. We, as part of the Mass Save program, there are special programs that can benefit renters, but there's a disconnect because landlords, I guess, will have to like sign on. So I think this is a issue that is being recognized in the Commission on Clean Heat. I believe they have discussed this and plan to address this issue in their more detailed recommendations.
Thanks, Han. Next question is, will there be a carbon market? And since most forest is owned by white people in non-EJ communities, will there be a requirement that a percentage of carbon credits go to EJ communities?
Those are not in our proposal for 2050 Clean Energy and Climate Plan.
Okay, thank you. How does the sequestering on working lands relate to the state's Healthy Soil Plan?
We have reviewed the Healthy Soils Action Plan, and so the Healthy Soils Action Plan, in there they have a lot of recommendations on how to incentivize healthy soil practices on not just farmlands but other types of lands. And so our proposal in the 2050 Clean Energy and Climate Plan is to continue to incentivize healthy soil practices such as no-till or low tillage on agricultural land, as well as the use of cover crops. And so we're looking for, in the 2030 CECP, we are asking, we're seeking money to provide financial incentives to compensate farmers to practice these healthy soil practices. And so we will continue to seek funding to make these financial incentives available to farmers, not just I guess typical farmers, but we're trying to like expand these incentives to underrepresented farmers as well. So that's something that we are trying to do, and that's how we are connecting with the Healthy Soils Action Plan.
Thank you. And then I see, sorry, there are a few more. What investments will the state be making in developing more green space beyond the Greening the Gateway Cities program?
Yeah, so we, in the 2030 Clean Energy and Climate Plan that came out in June, we committed to a goal of conserving our natural working lands, conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. And so by conserving these lands, a lot of times these lands could be available for public access. And so this commitment of 30% of lands and waters by 2030 will get increased to 40% by 2050. That's our proposal for the 2050 Clean Energy and Climate Plan. So we're hoping to do more plantings in urban areas and riparian areas, but then also conserving more of our natural and working lands for carbon sequestration, but then it also have the co-benefits of green areas for public consumption or public access.
Thank you. Are there targets in the plan for the deployment of solutions to directly reach and benefit EJ communities? For example, in terms of energy efficiency services, distributed resources like rooftop and community solar, electric vehicles, tree planting?
So in our proposal for the 2050 CECP, we want to make sure that we set a goal for having certain amount or certain level of investments of clean energy and climate investments into EJ communities or benefiting EJ populations. And so we are proposing a process. We want to commit to a process. We don't have right now a good metric or a good goal without first consulting with this council and then with other stakeholders. But yeah, we're in terms of like the policy design, there are a lot of policies that try to like provide extra incentives for those with qualifying income levels or in certain communities. But with this goal, we were able to drive more specific level of investments into EJ communities. Did I answer that question? I hope I answered that question adequately.
And then do we have time for additional questions, Rishi? I didn't know if
think-
you wanted to say a piece before we wrapped up.
I think we have time for maybe one more question and then we can adjourn.
Okay. So this is on the topic of the EVs. Will there be fines for people who drive old cars? Where will the electricity be sourced from, and how will the rising cost of electricity be addressed?
There will not be fines, and that's not in our proposal for the 2050 Clean Energy and Climate Plan. For our policies to get the number of EVs to increase, it's targeting manufacturers. So California have vehicle emission standards, and those standards say that manufacturers of cars, you need to sell X amount of your light duty fleets that are powered by battery or other non-emitting technologies by a certain percentage by a certain year. So for 2035, it's 100% of new light duty vehicles have to be zero emitting. And so the obligation is on the manufacturer's side, and then and we're providing incentives for consumers to be able to buy these vehicles, and not just the new, but then hopefully the used as well. So there won't be any fines, and anyone who buys these vehicles, they'll be charging it at home or at public stations, charging stations, or at the workplace. And so these electricity will be powered by electricity grid. And so if you charge at home, you would have to, I think the question is, how do we pay? Is that the question? How do we pay for the power? So if you charge at home, you'll be paying out of your electricity bill like I do. But if you charge at your workplace, maybe your workplace pays for it, who knows? Or at public stations, sometimes it's free, sometimes it comes with a charge. I think sometimes I charge at downtown Boston, and maybe some like some cents per at IKEA. I think some cents per kilowatt hour, something like that. And I think I may have missed the third part of that question.
It was where will the electricity be sourced from, and how will the rising costs of electricity be addressed? So I think I think you've answered. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Han. Okay, I think we should put up the last slide, Val. I just want to make sure if there's anything that folks want to address, the council members want to address at the next meeting, please send them to Val so we can include them on the agenda. We will need to get that. Any suggestions for the agenda at least a week or 10 days beforehand, because we send it out to be translated. So please keep that in mind. Also, our next meeting is on November 9th, also an evening meeting. And I think if we don't have any other issues to speak about at this point, I'd like to open up the floor for a motion to adjourn, please, and a second.
I move to adjourn.
I didn't hear who that was. Was that Kalila?
Sorry. Yes, this is Kalila. I move to adjourn.
Thank you, Kalila. Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Ari. With that, we will adjourn this fourth meeting of the EJ Council, and we will see you very soon for the next one on the 9th. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your thoughts today. It was a very productive meeting. I'm happy we've hit some sort of stride. Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Val.